Hello and welcome to MySecurity TV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. My name's Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor with MySecurity Media, and this is our Friday morning episode. Hopefully, you're all safe and sound here in Sydney, but elsewhere, have a nice weekend planned. Our Tech and Sec Weekly, today we're going to be looking at DroneShield, and we've got the CEO of DroneShield, Oleg Vornik, and they've just come out with some record results for the second quarter of 2021. This is an ASX listed company, so looking forward to that. And then we're going to be crossing over to Perth, the safest state in Australia, and we're going to be talking to Paul Haskell-Dowland, the Associate Professor and a Dean, Executive Dean, Associate Dean, I beg your pardon, Associate Professor and Associate Dean for Computing and Security, ECU School of Science, and looking at the spyware attacks. We've had the Pegasus spyware episode recently. And our Indian correspondent wrote a good article on this in terms of what was happening in India with the NSO Group as well. So we'll be having a look at those. So not really related, but there'll be a segue, I'm sure, somewhere. If you happen to be listening, let us know where you're listening from, and I'll monitor the chats. But otherwise, we cover off on aerospace and space, defence and national security, cybersecurity and critical technology, and cities and infrastructure. We'll be streaming on YouTube, LinkedIn, and on Facebook. Our main Facebook page is the Asia Pacific Security Magazine. And again, if you've got any questions or comments, welcome to throw them in. And again, be interested to know where you're listening from. We'll go for the full 60 minutes. Paul may be slightly late, but we've got plenty of time with Oleg regardless. Just to catch up on what we did on Tuesday, we crossed to Singapore. Paul Hadji, the CEO of Harangi Cybersecurity, and looking at the misconfigured cloud infrastructure for enterprise. And then also we spoke to Dr. Alex Antic, who's in Canberra, who's a strategic data science expert, and looking at artificial intelligence and what all executives should know. So quite both good sessions, those. Just a heads up on what's coming up. We've got a CISO panel on the 10th of August at 2 o'clock Australian Eastern Standard Time. And we've got Alex Lazal, who's the head of security with Flybuys, and also Nick Savides, who is with ForcePoint. And again, looks a good session. That's going to be on our Learn Security platform. And we're just finalising the panel for this one. This is going to be on August 26th at 11:30 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, Government and Private Security. We've got a speaker from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, Admiral Retired Michael Rogers in the US, and Lani Rafidi, who is the Regional Director with Clarity. So once we've got the final CISO or industry representative, we'll start to get that going. But again, that is you can register with that on the Learn Security platform. Also, what's coming up, we've got a session with Akeda and looking at fraud prevention with Dan Geo, who's their director with APAC, and Neil Whelan, who's their principal field data scientist in APAC. And then also we're going to run a special session on Learn Security with Neil, who's looking at, we'll deep dive into the Akeda framework and preventing fraud in the digital world. So looking forward to those as well. Just new podcast released. Jane Lowe, our Singapore correspondent, space sector in Asia. She spoke to Ms. Lynette Tan, who's the CEO with SSTL, and their perspective of a pioneering Asian space organisation, and a very good interview that was. And then also our other interview with the Chief Data Officer, Kishira Sagar, who is with Latitude Financial Services and Understanding Data Literacy. Also, check out My Smart Tech TV. It's our new TV channel hosted by Jess Bainbridge, and also The Best in Tech. So she's got a number of interviews rolled out. The first one with D-Link is now out and available, but also welcome to say good day there. And we've got a few. Newman, safe up there again, Owen. Good on you, mate. And Gary from Hong Kong. Good on you, Gary. And it's hissing with rain. Okay, very good. So it's nice and sunny here in Sydney. And then women in security. So this has just been finalised. We've got top 30 women in security for the ASEAN region, and the announcements will come out on August 31, I've scheduled, which will be 5 o'clock Singapore time. So we'll have the awards ceremony for there, but quite a great lineup there with 30. And thank you also to our 7 judges and our 27 industry partners across the ASEAN 10 nations. So very good. And then also thank you to our sponsor, Secure ID, an RSA business as well. And if you want to support the channel, check out our merchandise on the MySecTV.shop as well. So it's great to have our LinkedIn audience signing in, and just not many on YouTube. I'll make sure it's going to be checking. But without further ado from me, this is on the back of DroneShield's second quarter 21 results. And we're going to be joined by Oleg Vornik, the Chief Executive Officer with DroneShield. Oleg, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Good on you, mate. Look, as we mentioned before, it took us a little while to have you on, but anti-drone solutions it just covers every industry, really, doesn't it? In terms of critical infrastructure, law enforcement, defence, and a range of different settings. And you're an ASX listed company, so it's really where to start. Maybe let's start on the results because I think that'll help sort of go to a sort of a macro view of the industry. You're seeing growth. That's the underlying sort of observations you've got in this sector.
Yeah, that's a great starting point, Chris. We have released our second quarter results a couple of weeks ago, which was 7.3 million of cash receipts for the quarter, approximately 6 times our period-on-period increase from the previous year. And that equated to about 9.1 million of cash receipts for the June 6 months. And that is approximately 50% improvement over the entire year in 2020, which in itself was a record year for us. So we're continuing to see record increases in our customer engagement. And importantly, it's not only the quantum of dollars, but also the pedigree of customers, such as the Australian Department of Defence, the US Air Force, UK Ministry of Defence, and many others. So we operate in about 120 countries around the world. And importantly, we're also expanding, and we can talk about it a little bit later, into electronic warfare and signals intelligence space, which is adjacent to counter-drone. And approximately 2 million out of the 7.3 million that we received was due to our electronic warfare contracts.
And now, maybe the electronic warfare, is this a new product you've done, or is this an acquisition? How does that work?
It's a new product or new capability that we rolled out in the last half a year or so. So our first contract in that space, approximately $600,000 with the Australian Department of Defence, was awarded in December last year. And as we completed the contract, we received the follow-on $3.8 million contract over 2 years that we are now starting to work on. Counter-drone and electronic warfare are fairly adjacent capabilities in a sense that you can think of spectrum dominance, where drones emit energy as they communicate with their controllers and send back information. But there are a lot of other things in a battlefield that emit energy as well. In fact, most of them do. And we can utilize similar kind of software within our artificial intelligence capabilities to analyze never seen before sort of emissions and classify and track them, which is quite valuable for defense.
Very much. And these are obviously sort of grants you've had. Maybe just talk us through, there's a UTS collaboration here as well, and that's part of the Defence Innovation Network. Is that where this is coming from as well, allow you to collaborate and do that research? Because again, it's quite a heavy capability. And yeah, how are you building that out? What's the roadmap for you?
The work with the optical artificial intelligence engine, DroneOptID, that we built is the other side of the coin to our electronic warfare work, which is artificial intelligence in the radio frequency spectrum. Right. So we received a grant under the Defence Innovation Network scheme to collaborate with UTS, University of Technology, Sydney. This was last year, and we spent quite some time building this groundbreaking product. So what it effectively enables you to do is to take any camera, optical and thermal capabilities or infrared, and look at a drone even quite far away where it's literally almost a speck, and be able to classify it as such, and then look at its payload and be able to also tell you what kind of drone it is and track it. Now, tracking of drones may seem like an old hat, so people have been tracking vehicles and persons for quite some time. But if you think about tracking a dinner plate size object, which is what drones typically tend to be sized at least in the spectrum of drones that we deal in, and that thing is moving at 20 meters a second, white drone against a white cloud, it's it's very, very hard to do this reliably, especially in a cluttered environment. And this is effectively the crux of our artificial intelligence capabilities. In the optical space, there have been some really amazing breakthroughs in the computer vision technologies over the last several years. So we're utilizing those and overlaying our artificial intelligence skill set that we built together with UTS on that. And we already started selling this product together with the rest of our sensor package to our customers around the world.
Is this part of the immediate response kit, is it?
Immediate response kit consists of our portable counter drone product. So it is our control, which is radio frequency based drone sensor. So you basically carry it on you. It's about a radio size object, about 1 kg. And then there's a drone gun Mark III, which is a 2 kilo pistol. So it's like the defeat once you detect the drone. So the immediate response kit is our briefcase size solution. You grab it, you open it up, it gives you the detection option, the defeat option, and you can take it kind of anywhere you go. The drone opt ID that I referred to earlier is actually part of our fixed site solution. So if you are protecting the base, if you're on a ship, if you are potentially on a vehicle and you have a camera as part of your security package, it might be a camera that you have already, then this is software layer that enables you to give your camera a lot more extra capabilities.
What type of camera are you using? Are you able to say?
We use quite a few. So we've been partnering with Bosch for quite some time, and they have really good value for money cameras, both for security and the high-end defense space as well.
Are you using their mix out of interest?
Yeah, we actually do. Yeah. So if you drive down Sydney roads and you see some of these white mix on the roads, we actually use those as well as the high-end version. They have several varieties. So we also partner with a Australian US company called Tracker Systems, and they do very high-end optical thermal cameras, more for defense applications. So we've done quite a lot of work, especially in the US government agency space, putting our software in those cameras and combining them with the rest of our detection and defeat sensors, like our Drone Sentry X on vehicle radio frequency based detection and defeat system.
Just put a link out. We cover this on our Drastic channel, our drones and robotics channel, and I've just put a link out to the drones related releases. Now, maybe talk us through how these partnerships are working. So you just build this up, and then where's the AI? Are you building the AI itself as well? So you've got the camera, and what type of, I suppose my next question would be, what type of key applications have you got? Is this going to be working for, say, prisons as well, or is it more sort of at a perimeter level, airports? Where are the applications you're seeing best suited? Then I want to move into that sort of the ground-based system. How big is it, and where does it get mounted, and that type of thing? But maybe what are the applications you're seeing, and what range of applications you've got?
Counter-drone market has pretty wide application. So defense is by far the largest set of customers for us today. This is not necessarily because their need is greater than other sectors, but the great thing about defense customers is that when there's requirement, there's usually budget, which is unfortunately not the case for many other types of customers, like prisons, which are usually, unfortunately, cash-starved, and airports, which tend to have pretty long and complex procurement processes. So the key markets are the three I just mentioned. So defense, airports, prisons. And when I say prisons, it's people flying contraband, smuggling drugs, weapons, cigarettes, escape kits into the facilities. Airports, of course, is the Gatwick-style incident when you have to ground all planes when you detect a drone being in the vicinity, because if it gets sucked into an engine or plane, that can ground the airliner with massive casualties involved. We're also seeing nuclear facilities as target customers. So we recently made a sale into that sector in the US that we expect to continue building on. Law enforcement is quite big. So Australian Federal Police has been our customer for some time, and we have law enforcement agencies like, for example, Tokyo Police also happens to be our customer with the Olympics on at the moment, and also law enforcement agencies in the US. intelligence agencies, which I can't go much into, but for obvious reasons, they are our customers, as drones represent threat both from surveillance and dangerous payload delivery capability. There are a number of others like border protection, Mexican gangs delivering drugs across borders, and so forth.
Yeah.
In terms of how DroneOpt ID is used, so 3 broad types of customer sets and products. So there are portable kind of customers. So that's where immediate response kit comes into play. So your RF patrol and drone gun kind of detection defeat capabilities. We have on the go market. So that's your vehicle and your ship products, and cameras don't necessarily feature in that market that much. But then the fixed site capabilities. So you're protecting a airport, a prison, maybe a defense kind of base. So we recently deployed at U.S. Air Force Grand Forks base in North Dakota, which is the home for Global Hawks, which are larger drones. And the concern there is people flying little drones around the base, potentially either as gathering intelligence or creating nuisance for the larger drones or potential terrorist attacks. So the camera product is in that sort of fixed site market for us.
Now, in terms of the application, in terms of you picking it up, so this is a detection, but also an interception tool with your drone gun as well. Are you finding which one is going the strongest? Is it the detection that they want to pick up first, as you say, the small plate that's a couple of kilometers away, versus then intercepting and taking over or knocking out that drone? How do the two work together? Is it just that your drone gun, is it the Mark III? Is it I take it number 3 being the third form of that? And what's your sort of product roadmap for that? Is that going to be improved?
By revenue split, detection and defeat are about equal for us at the moment. So for the detection, we use multiple sensors. We have been preaching the gospel for quite some time now that layered detection and layered defeat capability is the safest approach, assuming you have the budget. So we use radio frequency, radar, camera, and acoustic as the sort of 4 main pillars for detection, and each one has its strengths and weaknesses. Nothing is perfect. And then we use smart jamming for the defeat, which we find out of various defeat methods. People have been using eagles and lasers and all kinds of stuff. We find nets. We find that if you're going to pick one, smart jamming has its own important legal restrictions. So generally speaking, defense and certain law enforcement has ability to jam, but private sector generally, whether it's jamming or other means of bringing down drones, cannot. But given virtually all of our customers are government and majority of them defense, that itself is not an issue.
Yep. I want to just ask the question of do they have a mobile capability? That's your incident response kit rather than your fixed. In terms of the radar, is it able to detect anything else? Is it just focused on drones? Is it detecting other movement? You mentioned it's got sort of a radio frequency there as well. Is it detecting sort of for a perimeter security? Is that a potential?
Radar, or any radar, can be thought of as a motion sensor fundamentally. So our 3-dimensional radar gives a detection bubble of sort of that perfect hemisphere above the facility. Now you can use it in a number of ways. We train the software model to listen out for drones, because the thing about security system, any security system, is you want it to alert you when there is targeted threat, but at the same time minimize false alarms. So if you have a fire alarm on your house, as an analogy, and it rings every day when there's no fire, you're going to switch it off on day 2 because you're just going to get annoyed. So reduction of false alarms from any detection sensor is a critical part of the job. And there's usually a trade-off, meaning the more sensitive you make the detection system, more prone to false alarms you're going to get. So it's a bit of a science as to how you optimize it. But generally speaking, what we say is that there are already very well developed ground intruder detection systems, and we don't play in that market. We go specialized for drone detection, more sort of airborne type targets, which none of the existing classic perimeter security systems can deal with.
Nice. And what's your limitation? I take it you can pick up any readily available commercial drone and the like. How much effort would the offender, for want of a better word, need to go to avoid detection? Is there anything that they do to change their frequency, I suppose, or are you pretty much covering most of the commercial market?
We often draw an analogy between counter-drone and antivirus market. So a capable antivirus can deal with quite a lot, but you can't really go as far as saying you have complete bulletproof kind of system. So the thing about using artificial intelligence, which is what we do, as opposed to your sort of classic matching against database approach, is the system can think for itself and pick up on never seen before threats, which a classic system cannot. So I think the best way to think of artificial intelligence is, if you'd be looking at an object with your own eyes and you've never seen that object before, but you've seen similar objects, you can judge for yourself that it kind of belongs to the same type of threats or types of objects as what you've seen before, even though it doesn't technically match against your recorded database of threats. So similar thing with, if a criminal changes the look of the drone, so they make it look like a bird, or they change the radio frequency protocol, so it's a bit different to the sort of the main thing. The idea is, through the multi-sensor detection, all powered through AI, at least one or hopefully more sensors are going to say, hang on, this is looking very similar to the sort of threats I've been taught to listen for, and then it will alert the operator. And then the moment you see the visual on your camera, then you can decide what to do. And also the thing about jamming response, unlike say shooting, which we do not do, all of our products are completely safe to humans, by the way. Nothing what we do can harm a human. So the thing about jamming is you can use it without necessarily too much human judgment involved, meaning you certainly would not want to be shooting at anything without a human looking at it first, but you can jam an object if the system decides on its own that it looks remarkably like a drone, and that gives you real-time response.
So it can do it automatically? You can have that set to act autonomously?
Yeah, I mean, when a drone goes at 20 meters a second and you need a fast response, especially if it's barreling down at you with some explosives strapped to it, there's often no time for the operator
to make a decision. Is this where the tracker comes through? I'm just looking at, you've got the CUAS AI-enabled software, and that was released. This is coming out March last year. So you had a very busy 2021. And then with the tracker, is this where that's coming through? And then, how's 2021 looking for you? It's been a very busy year so far.
Yeah, so we continue refining our technologies. However, the focus now is on continuous software improvement. We have been pretty happy with the effort in the hardware space.
Yep.
So while eventually there will be improvements in hardware, you always want to make things lighter, faster, smaller, cheaper. At the end of the day, the biggest job for us is to continue making the software more efficient as we sort of push the boundaries of what's possible with artificial intelligence.
Well, take it that AI. Owen's just asked another good question. Do you have a friend and foe capability? So obviously you can clear, and drones. I take it that capability exists.
Yeah, or whitelisting is probably another way to put it.
Yep, a better way to put it.
Yes, where you can say this is a friendly drone, because of course a lot of our customers use small drones themselves, and you want to be able for them to use drones for whatever missions they have in mind, while at the same time clearing the bad drones out of the picture.
Very good. And what type of integration are you establishing? Is it are you able to integrate with other sort of security management software platforms, or are you still standalone?
Our integration is definitely the key here. So if you look at portables, even that is often integrated through what's called battle management systems, which is a fancy word for saying you're integrating into a wider system. So we do integration both ways, and we've done it a number of times now. So we have likes of large defense primes. So, for example, our partnership with Thales has been pretty well publicized. So they integrated our kit into their command and control system. And then on the other side, we integrate the likes of Tracker, Zenith, which are drones themselves in our system, and even Bosch cameras, for example, into our command and control. So the idea is the customer doesn't want 5 or 6 disconnected products. They want an ecosystem. So the great thing about what we offer, and we're certainly doing it the hard way, but it pays off in the long term, is if the customer says, DroneShield, I want your ecosystem, so we call it Drone Sentry C2, C2 standing for command and control, then they can adopt that ecosystem. It's like an operating system, kind of like a Mac or Windows, with our and third-party sensors plugged into that, and we have a number of those customers. Or if the customer already has an established, say, Thales or other integrator C2s, then they can just plug our products into that. And you want to go both ways as much as you can, so be integrated in as many things as you can, and for as many things to be integrated into you as possible.
Though I noticed here you're with the SCEC and SOSEC in the US as well. Where are you with the company? You've been around for about 7 years, 5 years listed. You must have you got offices all over the place? But you're manufacturing here in Australia as well. Yeah, maybe just an overview of the business, how many staff you've got, and then finally on your rollout, how you deal with your client and what training might be involved. So yeah, maybe just an overview of the company itself and how you're standing.
We went through a rapid growth as I think about the last 7 years and 5 years as a listed company. So today we are about 50 people, which is roughly triple where we were a year ago. So despite the whole pandemic, we continue to rapidly scale up. We have a team of just over half a dozen people in the US, in Virginia, that we continue to grow, which is effectively our channel into the US market, which is an enormous opportunity for us across a number of different segments. And in Australia, we have approximately 40 people, about 30 engineers, and that's split across quite a number of disciplines. So in a way, we are sort of a mini prime ourselves, where we do everything from design and programming of circuit boards to application software to overall product design, our own manufacturing in-house, even down to things like brackets. So the history for that is we started in kind of more targeted areas of design and manufacturing, and then we were getting frustrated with this thing and that thing, where stuff that we were getting did not meet our requirements, our customers' requirements for whatever reason. So we just said, we're just gonna do it ourselves. So as a result, we're actually incredibly wide in terms of our capabilities. And so we do our own in-house manufacturing here in Sydney. We're in Haymarket. And also we have a really good relationship with an outsourced established defense electronics manufacturer in Adelaide, who does work for us as well. In terms of our global footprint, we also have a guy on the ground who runs our UK office in partnership with BT, British Telecom, who are our exclusive UK distributor, doing some good work there with the UK Ministry of Defence. And on top of that, we have in-country partners in about 120 countries around the world. So the idea would be that those would be established distribution partners across different defense and security products. Sometimes they even sell drones. So the idea would be they might carry 10, 20, 30 different brands, will be their counter-drone brand, and that have established trusted channels to the customer, knowing when bids come out, etc. So they basically represent us on the ground. And before COVID started, I used to travel about 6 months a year on the road together with our sales and engineering team, training those guys up and participating in conferences. Think about defense security. It's very much sort of game of trust where
Yeah.
people want to look you in the eye. So the good thing about the timing, when the pandemic hit us, just at that time, we finally finished our global sort of training and relationship. I mean, you never truly finished, but we've done the bulk of establishing of the relationships and training of the distributors globally.
Yeah, likewise. So you must have been, as you say, on the road 6 months a year, going to pretty much every defence expo there was, and there's a lot of them as well. So well done to even get that far. But as you say, the pandemic with lockdowns has also increased the sort of the surveillance requirements. Police have been deploying drones themselves in relation to COVID. So the drone market obviously is driving the anti-drone market as well, where the anti-drone solution becomes a requirement for any large facility. We talked about defence and law enforcement, but any secure facility is probably likely to be looking at this type of solution now.
Vast majority of our business is not so much your average hooligan with a drone trying to spy on a facility, but more sort of hardened terrorists and proper state-on-state warfare, utilizing small, cheap, consumer and commercial grade drones, sometimes modified in surveillance or attacks. So when I think about our market and why we increased as much as we have over the last several years, it's more around we're seeing the macro tensions both globally and regionally continuing to increase. I mean, not a day goes by that you read an article about China taking more and more proactive stance in their positioning in the region, the Taiwan conflict. A lot of that is based on what you'd call asymmetric warfare as opposed to traditional warfare. So if you are a country deploying its defense forces, nobody these days want to send a missile or send tanks because you're creating an open conflict. So instead, it's more gray zone warfare, the underhanded kind of conflict that we're seeing, which is sort of a war without being a war. So the likes of cyber warfare, the likes of building islands in South China Sea with airstrips and the like. Where DroneShield comes into play in all this is in twofold. So firstly, use of small drones for surveillance and payload delivery is increasing. We've seen examples of that by Russia in the Ukraine conflict, by Azerbaijan in Armenia, and a number of others. The precedents are strongly there, and that's use of drones, anything from very large sort of airplane-sized drones right down to tiny drones like what you buy in a JB Hi-Fi electronics store. So our capabilities go straight to the heart of awareness of the airspace and defeat of such drones. Sometimes, by the way, you may not want to defeat because you give away your presence by defeating the drone. So there's quite a bit of strategy involved. But also with the rise of gray zone and asymmetric warfare, there's a strong theme on spectrum dominance. So a lot of people who are not as familiar with defense consider defense to be all about airplanes and ships and tanks and missiles, which of course it is. But then a lot of it is about things that emit in the spectrum. So you want to make sure that you understand what your adversary has that emits different kind of energy, and at the same time protect yourself against this, and then make sure that you have spectrum dominance on the things that on your side might emit energy. So passive sensors, for example, is becoming quite a big thing. So our electronic warfare capabilities, our current contracts with the Australian Department of Defence play right into that spectrum dominance theme of basically be able to detect never seen before targets and be able to do better analysis of the spectrum.
And I think, as you say, we're talking about, we've mentioned it before, fire ant warfare and, multiple drones and drone swarms. That's where you need sort of an AI machine learning able to make decisions on the go in relation to that. So I can definitely see where it's going, and you're gearing up for that. Would you say you've got that kind of capability now in terms of a drone swarm, and can you take out drone swarms?
We sure can. We sure can. So there's quite a lot of science, and drone swarms tend to evolve as they go. So in the early years, drone swarms were literally 5 pilots or 10 pilots, each one piloting a drone, and that's a swarm for you. Then you were able to have one person controlling multiple drones, so they became a more complex swarm. Now we're seeing really cutting edge sort of swarming where there are high value smart drones, so to speak, and low value dumber drones, so to speak. And it may not necessarily be as obvious which ones are which. And the idea is that if you take down one smart drone, then another one takes over. So how do you kind of approach a swarm like that, which doesn't necessarily take instruction from the ground controller, but basically is completely autonomous, and you have to target the sort of leaders of the pack, so to speak, even though they may look exactly the same. So I'd like to think that we are a global leader in the technology in countering swarms, but it's a field that's evolving really rapidly. And by the way, when we talk about drones, I think most people think about objects that fly in the sky, but drones can also crawl on the ground. They can skim on the surface of water, or even swim underwater.
I think it's look. We're definitely going to have you back. I think as you develop, and now I've got a direct link to you now, Oleg. We'll annoy you at least every 6 to 12 months and monitor this. And it's definitely a field that we're hearing a lot more discussions around drone swarms, asymmetric warfare in this particular space as well. And it sounds like you're making some good moves as a company, expanding into electronic warfare as well, which is a natural progression, as you say. So. Very good one to watch. Now, you're listed on the ASX. DRO is your tag, isn't it? Correct?
That's right. That's right.
All
Thanks,
right.
Chris.
So
yeah, we listed about 5 years ago.
Sorry, go.
We listed about 5 years ago, and yes, DRO is our ticker. In fact, we are the only publicly listed counter-drone company in the world. And as far as electronic warfare goes, I mean, the big guys like defense primes surely do it, but I believe in terms of a public listed electronic warfare business, we also happen to be the only one in the world that's publicly listed.
Nice. Well, and it's great to support an Australian company as well, and particularly here in Sydney. So Oleg Vornik, the CEO of DroneShield, thank you so much for your time. We didn't get onto the training aspect. Maybe we'll just close off on that if we can. What's training? How much training is involved in this? Is it just a matter of pointing the gun up and pointing it towards the target? And if it's an AI-driven sort of detection radar, it's doing it most of it itself. So limited training.
There's virtually no training to speak of. The way we explain our products is they're designed to be for a distracted operator. You don't want to give somebody who already has 5 or 6 jobs on, wherever they are in a control room in the field, yet another job. So the systems are designed to be super easy to use, very intuitive, and also not taking what we call cognitive burden from the operator, so they can go on with their day job, and this is something that just sits there in the background and alerts them in a sort of easy to understand way when something happens.
Great. Well, look, it's an impressive looking thing. That's the Mark III, and again, this looks like it's a good product, good looking product. I've always thought, regardless. But look, thank you so much, Oleg Vornik, the CEO of DroneShield. This will go out as an edited standalone session, but thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Good on you, mate. All the best. I'll put you backstage. And without further ado, we'll move straight over. And I think he's had a busy morning. We'll welcome Paul Haskell-Dowland, Associate Professor and Associate Dean, Computing and Security, ECU School of Science. Paul, good to see you again.
A very good morning to you. Apologies for running a few minutes late.
No, all good.
You like I missed a really interesting talk there.
It was. You'll be able to track it off and have a look at it later. But appreciate your time as well. And you better tell us, because I think the last time we spoke, I was actually there in Perth in Joondalup, where we did a podcast. So you're in the ECU Security Operations Centre, correct?
I am indeed, one of 2.
Oh, you've got 2 now. Okay. Well,
we have. So this is the smaller version. This is the 8-seater, which allows us to engage with industry, undertake operations, and sort of do it for real. And then we have a 24-seat version across the corridor, which allows us to scale up to the training levels that we need for the number of students we have.
And that's just next door to your red team, blue team room, right?
It is indeed a 60-seater, so we can do some really sizable operations, a bit of red and blue teaming. We've also got about 150 or so seats on the second floor. So we use that for sort of big community engagement activities and hackathons.
Yep,
so
great.
Really great things to play around with.
Well, look, this came out from a release. You've been looking at the spyware attacks and particularly the NSO Group's Pegasus software. Maybe introduce us to the NSO Group. And again, while you're talking, I'll put a link out. But we covered this on our Asia Pacific Security magazine. Sarosh Bana, our Mumbai correspondent, wrote about this. And there's been quite a bit of activity in India, but this was around the world, right?
It was indeed, and India particularly notable because of the number of targets for this particular piece of software, the spyware, and the fact that there's indicators, evidence that a number of the targets are opposition party members. So it's being used for potentially political means, which is very much against the published ethos of the NSO Group themselves. So the Pegasus spyware is their sort of premium product that they sell predominantly to governments, law enforcement agencies, and obviously intelligence agencies around the world. So that particular organization is a private company funded by various sources around the world and has developed a number of tools over the years, but Pegasus is perhaps their main one. And it's a piece of spyware, it's a platform effectively that allows government agencies to deploy the malware against targets. And it's typically deployed against mobile phones, mainly iPhones, but there's also been some Android devices targeted as well. And it is really the ultimate spyware. So the current incarnation is delivered via a text message, typically an iMessage, sent as a zero-click infection vector. So the recipient simply receives a text message, and in some earlier versions, it was also propagating through WhatsApp, and it would literally be a missed call or a direct phone call to you, and that was enough to deploy the spyware. So it's a completely transparent, very James Bond. And once you've got that spyware running on your system, it's effectively a complete backdoor to your mobile device. And to put it into sort of context on Apple devices or Android, it's equivalent to rooting or jailbreaking your device. And it gives that remote entity, presumably government agency, law enforcement, intelligence agency, complete backdoor access to your device, obviously to deploy more malware if needed, but to be able to intercept communications, to look at your messages, track your location. And because smartphones have got cameras and microphones, effectively operating as a spy device, they can monitor everything you're doing, and all transparent to the user.
Pretty incredible, even just from either receiving a message or a missed call. The leak came out of a leaked database of 50,000 telephone numbers were first accessed by French nonprofit Forbidden Stories and Amnesty International, essentially revisiting a global scandal that first emerged in 2019. They shared their information with 16 media partners, including the Washington Post, Le Monde, DZ, The Guardian, and Indian news websites. The Wire, which considered carried reports on military-grade spyware from Israeli NSO Technologies Group's Pegasus company, aided 45 governments around the world, including India, to successfully hack the smartphones of thousands of citizens for tracking their activities in real time. As you say, James Bond stuff, but on steroids. Now, one of your sort of releases came out, and this is some of the work that you do at ECU, is how to protect your smartphone. What is it able to be protected, and what can be done? And even from a consumer level, but maybe even at a higher level of those at an enterprise, what if the CEO or various company executives get targeted with this? What should an enterprise be thinking about?
So far, we've not had any reports of sort of industrial espionage using these particular tools. Now, that doesn't mean that hasn't happened. It's just that we've not heard about it.
Yep.
Now, in terms of the particular spyware that is currently working around the sort of stories on the internet, this is something that is pretty much impossible to defend against. It is a zero-day vulnerability, obviously now known about, but a zero-day vulnerability in particularly Apple devices. It was targeting the iMessage platform, and there is no defense against that. If you receive one of these messages, you will be infected if your device is vulnerable to that particular compromise. Now, this has been in use for quite some time now, and being a zero-day attack, Apple and obviously the more limited vulnerabilities in the Android platform were unknown about. And it's sort of reminiscent of the issues that we had coming out of the NSA a few years back, where the exploits they were using against Windows operating systems had never been reported to Microsoft. So it's very much in that same kind of ilk, that a private organization effectively has the keys to everyone's mobile devices and isn't playing nicely and sharing that with the organization responsible, in this case Apple, because obviously that would be bad for their business model. This gave them that back door.
Yeah.
Now,
well, and then they're only going to tell you when you have to find out first, and then we'll share it around, and it's outside the Five Eyes, obviously, there as well.
But obviously Israel is very well connected with the US.
Yes.
So we can't underestimate the intelligence partnerships that go on between these entities. And I would be very surprised if the US government wasn't intimately aware of this particular mechanism. And obviously there are lots of issues to do with international collaboration on these things. But I guess to get back to the sort of core part of the question, in terms of what you can do to protect yourself against this malware, really the only option you've got at the moment is to continue to deploy patches to make sure your device is kept up to date, and to make sure that you are watching out for any updates if your device doesn't auto notify you. Because at some point, and I did notice there was a new update for iOS in the last few days that certainly came to my phone. I don't believe it fixes that bug officially, but it may well be they've done something in the background. But until that is done, we're not going to be safe from this kind of attack. But I guess just to reassure people, this is not the kind of malware currently that will be targeting the everyday user, and even most corporates. It's really the target for criminal investigations, for particularly terrorist investigations or terrorist-related activities. And unfortunately, as we've seen, it then tends to spill over into what, as far as the governments are concerned, are legitimate targets.
Yep.
And I think this is another important point. We are classifying these attacks as being, very inappropriate, illicit targets that should never have been the focus of interest of those governments. But from the perspective of those governments, they are entirely legitimate targets. In many countries, simply opposing the government is enough for you to be investigated under their legal frameworks. And we have our perspective, they have theirs.
Correct. And it is that form of that interception. We obviously have our Telecommunications Interception Act and those types of things. And it may well be that law enforcement and intelligence agencies will intercept. Operation Ironside also came to mind as well, just there, but that's obviously using a specific application. But again, it gives you the sort of the sense where everyone has a smartphone these days, and with us, and I know that's number 3 on your on the list of top 5s. Is don't lose your phone and keep your physical and keep your phone close to you, which most people do anyway.
They do, but still far too many people don't have security enabled or don't have it auto locking, for example. So if your phone is physically accessible to somebody, yes, you might never click on links, but there would be nothing to stop, an adversary accidentally grabbing your phone, quickly browsing to a web page that, does a drive-by download of some malware and then returning it. How many people leave their phone on their office desk?
Yeah, and we often do hear of this in a sort of domestic violence setting as well, particularly for ladies in that situation. Make sure you keep your phone close to you, because it is very easy, Paul, is that not right? As you say, just simply going to a website with auto malware download and they'll have access to it.
It is indeed, and obviously there's lots of other technologies that can be used, almost as legitimate apps that can be installed on devices, particularly on the Android operating system. And I did an article a little while ago about the Apple AirTags and the domestic violence implications for those, and we've already seen some examples of particularly bad incidents. But I mean, obviously, all of this technology is great, and I wouldn't discourage people from engaging with it. But sometimes you do wonder if we were better off with the dumb phones, the small bricks in our pockets that couldn't do very much.
And I suppose the other one is the Android versus iOS, which is kind of the better of the two, I suppose. Is Apple more secure? But then there's also the risk of, if the Apple keys ever get out, then half the world's taken over. So Android tends to be less secure, right?
It's actually a really interesting discussion area, because obviously people do associate Apple with security, and they are seen as being a well-protected ecosystem. And that's an important point, is that Apple is very tightly controlling of the entire environment. So this is why people jailbreak their phones, to escape that kind of control. And it does reinforce security. There have been very few malicious apps available through the legitimate App Store, and there are relatively few real bugs in the system. But when one comes along, because we've got that tightly managed system, because the patches and the iOS updates are deployed with almost universality across the world, what you're also doing is creating a common base. And so if you're going to put the time and effort, and obviously the NSO Group has invested millions into developing malware to target these devices, the benefit of targeting an Apple device is that there are going to be millions of devices that are vulnerable all at the same time. Of course,
it's the holy grail, really.
At the same time.
Yeah, and exactly right. You can push it out to every mobile phone on the Apple network, right, in terms of that platform. So it's the keys to the kingdom.
But Android is an interesting sort of alternative argument, in that by having so many flavors of the Android environment, and in particular with manufacturers customizing the platform, it reduces the footprint of identical systems. Obviously, you've still got a lot of users all with the same Samsung device, for example, but it does make it that bit less desirable perhaps for the developers. But it then introduces a further problem, that as the manufacturers move on to the next model, they often leave behind the older ones. And because they do customize the Android operating system, they start to stop supporting the updates for them. You might get the occasional critical one. So whilst you'll end up with maybe hundreds of flavors of Android across the world with slightly different vulnerabilities, you do still have that common set or common base as the latest, greatest new gadget comes along.
Very good. And as you say, you might not get the spread, but they do have those inherent vulnerabilities. And the secret to this really is the main message is keep the devices current and well patched, and do those patches. Really, that's the best thing we can do. And as you say, have a access control over the front of it.
Absolutely. And also just thinking about the use of the phone. So as we talked earlier about physically protecting it, not leaving it lying around, making sure it's locked. Obviously think about things like backup. So, should your device be compromised, and let's think a bit wider than just this spyware example. We've seen ransomware hitting systems all around the world. What if ransomware were to hit an iOS version and spread maliciously through the world? What if they could get into the update mechanism for Apple? Again, it's not massively likely, but if I was looking for a target, that would be a pretty big one.
I'm sure the day will eventually come. And I suppose the last two here is avoiding or being aware of the free and public Wi-Fi services, and then also the encryption.
Absolutely. So the public Wi-Fi issue is one, obviously, that we've talked about many times in the cyber domain, just because of the inherent risks. And don't forget, hotel Wi-Fi is another very commonly overlooked particular issue. But if you're on a public Wi-Fi network, there's no guarantee who set that up, who's watching it. And obviously we know that there are spoof networks all over the place. So avoiding using it for anything sensitive or security conscious. VPNs, particularly for organizations, are really useful, especially if it's the organizational one. It gives you a somewhat guaranteed exit node. But again, there are also vulnerabilities with those things. They often depend on DNS. And if someone was really trying to attack an individual, they could certainly spoof enough of the infrastructure to be able to fool some platforms. And then thinking about your device tracking and remote wipe capabilities. If it simply gets stolen, think of all the data that's on there. The keys may be stored on there, passwords. again, if they can get into the device and get that malware installed, they have access to everything on the device, and that could lead through to the keychain on an iOS device. I've not seen that yet, but I would be quite expecting that to happen at some point.
Yep. I think it's something definitely from an enterprise perspective, corporate security is definitely one to be aware of. And while we're all in lockdown, they at least know potentially where you are. So be aware of that, particularly, interesting circumstances at the moment. And maybe that hotel Wi-Fi isn't being used as much as it would. Otherwise, it's in quarantine. And Paul, maybe let's just finish off. We've got a couple of minutes. How's ECU going? How have you adapted to you're pretty good over there in Western Australia and pretty free. But again, the university, like all the university sector, has been impacted, but you're in cybersecurity, which is a growth sector. So I take it the school's doing well and the operations centre hasn't been impacted too much?
No, the school is doing very well. We're in a very privileged position within Australia because WA has been isolated from the majority of the outbreaks that we've seen across the nation. But obviously, we're still impacted by the federal government restrictions on travel and in particular with international students. And unfortunately for particularly our postgraduate cyber courses, a reasonable proportion of the cohort is in that international market. But we have benefited from the fact that we introduced our accelerated online masters a couple of years ago. So whilst many of the international students wouldn't be in a position to enroll in that and undertake it entirely remotely, we have seen growth in numbers across the domestic market, particularly in the mature age students and those perhaps even in the cyber industry who have been looking to validate their experience with a professional an academic qualification. So in terms of the student numbers, ECU has seen the cybersecurity cohort increase to just shy of 1,300 students as at the end of last year. And in a few weeks, we'll have this year's figures, but there's a good chance we might actually slightly exceed last year's total. It's not going to be the stellar growth we saw in previous years, but we have sort of compensated for the lack of international students with an uptake in domestics, particularly in that accelerated course.
Great to hear. And I suppose also through, say, the Australian cybersecurity strategy and the call for an uptake in skills, there's a number of grants. I don't know if you got one of the recent grants in terms of training and upskilling as well, but I take it that's also driving the demand here. So it must be looking good for the next couple of years at least.
So certainly our anticipation is it will grow. We didn't actually get much in the way of funding for those particular programs, partly because we've actually already exceeded all of our student caps. But we have introduced an undergraduate certificate as a new pathway into cyber. So particularly targeting those who don't meet our entry pathway for typical entry into undergraduate courses. And it allows them to also get a flavour for the cybersecurity course, because we find a lot of, particularly high school leavers, are not really aware of what cybersecurity is. They know computer science, but the cybersecurity domain is lacking in role models. And it's something I've talked about many times previously, that you talk to parents and they know of Jeff Bezos and other key players in the computing domain. But when you talk about cybersecurity, they might have heard of Snowden and associate. They've probably not heard of Kevin Mitnick, but that would perhaps.
But again, they're only hearing of the hackers and the guys that have either been arrested or that's it.
I think those news stories.
Yeah, but you must have a few. I mean, ECU is renowned for its cybersecurity, and so again, you've got a good pedigree there, and you must, and with students around the world as well, not just within the Asia Pacific region.
We have. So certainly we have a global network of current students and certainly a global network of alumni. And we're actually looking to build on that profile at the moment. So a while back, we set up a LinkedIn group to connect with existing future and past students. And that has actually really started to take off now, with job opportunities now being pushed by our alumni back to our graduating students. So that's been really successful. But we're looking to build the profiles of our grads, particularly those in senior positions. And I'm hoping over the next 6 to 12 months that we'll be really pushing the career opportunities and the successes of some of our grads to showcase what the careers in cyber actually look like as opposed to the Hollywood model, unfortunately represented by the sock I'm sitting in today. And I do appreciate the lighting isn't great. I didn't have time to go and get my
No,
sound lights.
that's all right. Well, I could see you got the Talos platform in the background, but you also partnered with so Talos was Cisco, isn't it? Wasn't you partnered with RSA as well? Talos is where was Talos from? I'm trying to think.
Yeah, to be honest, I'd have to go and look at my information to remember. But obviously, the pew pew maps behind me are the sort of off the shelf ones, and we are continuing to talk with various partners about utilizing various software platforms as part of our teaching, because we have now got a unit in the area of security operations. And one of the partners in particular we're looking at is Microsoft. So the Sentinel platform, as an example, is one that there's a lot of demand for within WA. A lot of government agencies looking at it. So we're going to try and expose more of our students to those, as well as the other SOC and SIEM-based platforms that are obviously out there, both free and commercial. We want students to have a really good exposure to all.
Of course, and it is Cisco. Yeah, there you go. Cisco Talos Intelligence Group. Beautiful. I'm glad I guessed that
Your
right.
Your memory is excellent.
Very good. And a bit of a disclosure, I am a graduate. You mentioned highlighting the graduates, so it's just getting longer and longer away. 2005, I think I graduated from ECU, and I've also been assisting with your industry consultative group. So it's been kind of a journey to stay in touch with ECU over the years. You do have a very strong alumni. So for those who are in the alumni, well, worth checking it out and having a look what they're currently doing as well. Maybe a call to action, Paul. Have you potentially got a call to action? How can they find out more information, or what would be the key page you want to drive them to if they want to find out more?
Absolutely. So the quickest thing to do, as always, is go to Google. Just search for cybersecurity at ECU. So, I mean, ECU obviously has a number of core courses. We do teach pure cybersecurity degrees, both at bachelor's and at master's level, and indeed offer opportunities all the way through to PhD with our ECU Security Research Institute. And many of your listeners will be well aware of the SRI, sort of globally recognized as a leader in security research. And obviously ECU is a teaching and learning institution in the cyber area. Great.
Well, look, Paul, appreciate you taking the time out this morning, coming in slightly earlier than normal. But a pleasure to see you again, mate. And well, easy for you over there in WA. Stay safe. But we'll continue our lockdown here in Sydney. But hopefully I'll be over in Perth before the end of the year.
My pleasure. Lovely to talk to you again. Have a great day.
All the best. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Okay, and just to finish off, that's great. Thank you, Paul. And just sort my captions out. Just to finish off, just quite quickly, actually, given that we're just slightly over time, which is good. The report of the day is the IBM Cost of Data Breach Report 2021. And these are some of the Australian figures. But as it happens, I'm going to be interviewing Chris Hockings on Tuesday, on our Tuesday episode, who's the CTO with IBM. And we're going to walk through this report properly and obviously go through it's not clicking over for me for some reason. 1 second. And then we'll walk through the report and how it looks for the Asia Pacific. And these are some of the Australia's key findings. The sample size, this is cost of a data breach. So sample size was 25. The average records breach was just under 24,000. The cost per capita was $169. Years studied, 12. I'm not too sure the context of that. But the cost of each data record, $3.70 in the Australian dollar. And in terms of the top 3 industries per record cost, services industry, $203, technology industry, $224, and the financial industry, $233. Now, we did cover this last year with the IBM ASEAN Security Summit. So these reports are worthwhile having a look at, but I look forward to diving into that a little bit more further detail on Tuesday with Chris. That's it from us today. That was a very good session on DroneShield and also from ECU and looking at spyware attacks as well. Thank you very much. Enjoy your weekend. And for those in Sydney, stay safe. And hopefully this lockdown leaves us soon. So thank you very much. Have a great weekend.